Hello, everyone. Welcome back, and thanks for joining us today. We have a brand new story to share with you, so let's get started. They always say silence is peaceful, but I've learned it can be suffocating. After my retirement and the slow, invisible decline of my health, silence had crept into every corner of my life. My days had become a loop of half-eaten meals, worn-out cardigans, and an armchair that molded to the shape of someone too tired to fight time. The garden outside my window, once bursting with color, had withered in quiet sympathy with me. I hadn't left the house in days, maybe weeks. I don't even remember the last time I spoke to someone, really spoke, not just a forced smile to the mailman. And then it happened, a knock on the door. At first, I thought I imagined it. No one ever came by unannounced. The second knock was firmer, insistent, cutting through the numbness like a blade. I hesitated, heart beating faster than it had in months. When I opened the door, there stood Liam, my neighbor from 3 houses down. Younger, maybe in his 40s, always quiet, always polite. But now he was holding a steaming container in one hand and something softer in his eyes. "Hi, Evelyn, right?" he said gently. "I hope this isn't strange. I made too much soup and figured you might like some." I blinked at him, confused, my throat tightening without warning. I hadn't realized how desperately I needed someone to see me, not out of pity, but out of care. I don't know what to say," I murmured. He smiled. "You don't have to say anything." I took the container from his hands. It was warm, real. "You haven't been out much. I just thought maybe you'd like a little comfort." I nodded, unable to speak. He turned to leave, but before he did, he said one more thing. "If you ever want to talk or just sit in silence with someone, I'm around." And then he walked away, leaving me in the doorway with a simple gift that felt like the start of something I hadn't allowed myself to hope for in a long time. That night, I didn't just warm the soup. I warmed something inside me that I thought was gone forever. The next few days were quiet again, but it wasn't the same kind of quiet. Liam's visit had stirred something in me. I found myself listening for sounds, his car pulling into the driveway, footsteps on gravel, a knock. Silly, I thought. He was just being kind. But kindness, when you've been living in shadows, feels a lot like sunlight. On the 4th evening, just as dusk was melting into night, there it was again, a knock. My heart lurched. I opened the door with a mix of eagerness and apprehension, and there he stood, again, this time, holding a small paper bag and an apologetic smile. "I was at the market earlier," he said, lifting the bag slightly. "They had fresh blackberries. I remembered you mentioned in passing, months ago, that they were your favorite." I hadn't even remembered saying that. But he did. "You remembered that?" I asked, genuinely stunned. He nodded, his expression unreadable. Some things just stick. I invited him in without thinking, the loneliness in me overriding every old instinct to retreat. We sat in the living room, the low lamp casting golden light over the room that hadn't seen company in ages. For a while we talked about the garden, the weather, the little things, but under the surface, something trembled. When there was a lull in conversation, Liam's eyes lingered on mine. "Evelyn, are you really okay?" The way he asked it, low and careful, made my throat tighten. I could have lied. I almost did, but I didn't. "No," I said quietly. "I haven't been for a while." The room went still. I expected discomfort, maybe even regret in his eyes, but instead I saw something else. Understanding. He didn't speak right away. Just reached forward, placing the small container of blackberries on the table like a quiet offering. You don't have to talk about it, but if you ever want to, I'll listen. No judgment. Something inside me cracked, not in pain, but in release. He didn't pity me. He saw me. That night, after he left, I stared at the little bag on my table for what felt like hours. A few blackberries in a paper sack shouldn't mean much, but they did. They meant someone was paying attention, and that changed everything. It was strange how quickly Liam became a presence in my life. Not overwhelming or intrusive, just present, like a gentle hum in the background of a song you didn't know you needed until it was gone. A few days after the blackberry visit, he showed up again. This time, it was to return a book I hadn't even realized I'd loaned him. One I'd mentioned in a passing conversation weeks ago about childhood favorites. Thought you might want it back, he said, holding it with both hands like something delicate. He lingered on the porch until I asked him in. We sat at the kitchen table sipping tea, the silence not awkward but electric. Each pause filled with something just beneath the surface. It was then, in the middle of stirring sugar into his cup, that he looked up and said, "You remind me of someone I used to know." My heart paused mid-beat. In a good way, I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "The best way," he replied, eyes steady and vulnerable in a way that made my breath catch. And then he said it. "She was the first person who ever made me feel seen. And you do the same." His words landed like a soft blow, both comforting and frightening. I felt my pulse quicken, my cheeks flush. I didn't know what to say. I looked away, afraid of what he might see in my face. Hope, fear, longing. Maybe all of them. "Liam," I began, but the words caught in my throat. He didn't push. He never did. "You don't have to explain," he said gently. "I just wanted you to know." The air around us shifted then, like a curtain being pulled back to let in something neither of us was ready for, but neither of us wanted to ignore. After he left that night, I stood by the window, watching his figure disappear down the path. My hands were trembling, not from fear, but from something I hadn't felt in years. Anticipation, vulnerability, a terrifying kind of comfort. I knew somehow that everything was changing, and once again, it had begun with something simple. Words spoken in a kitchen over tea, but their weight, it stayed with me. I thought I could bury it, the feeling, the weight of Liam's words that night, but they lingered like a soft echo in the walls of my house, in the space between my breaths. I kept myself busy, sorting drawers that didn't need sorting, watering plants that weren't thirsty, reading books without absorbing a single word. But none of it could drown out the look in his eyes when he said I made him feel seen. What haunted me wasn't just what he said, it was that I felt the same, and I didn't know what to do with that truth. A few days passed in silence between us, and I was almost relieved. I needed the stillness to think, to process, to retreat. But then it came again, the knock. This time it was different, firmer, more urgent. When I opened the door, Liam stood there, but his expression was off, tense, restless, like he'd been pacing for hours before working up the nerve to come. "I need to ask you something," he said. I stepped aside wordlessly, my pulse already thudding. In the kitchen, he didn't sit. He hovered, one hand gripping the back of the chair, the other raking through his hair. "Have I crossed a line?" he asked, voice low. "That night, I've been going over it in my head. I didn't mean to put pressure on you, Martha. I needed you to know, but if I've made things harder, I'll back off. I swallowed hard, the lump in my throat returning with brutal familiarity. No, I whispered. You didn't cross a line. I paused, my hands gripping the edge of the counter behind me. I didn't know how much I needed to hear those words until you said them, and that scares me. His expression softened, relief washing over him in a quiet exhale. It scares me too, he said. We stood there, both suspended in that fragile moment between fear and possibility. It would have been easier to close the door, to thank him for the soup and the fruit and the kindness and walk away. But instead, I said, will you stay? Just for a little while. And he nodded, the space between us no longer a chasm, but a fragile, growing bridge. Something had begun, and this time, neither of us was pretending otherwise. That night, Liam didn't leave. He didn't stay over either, but he lingered longer than usual, sitting across from me in the soft glow of the living room lamp, both of us cocooned in a silence that somehow said more than any conversation ever could. We didn't talk about what had happened, about what we'd admitted, but it sat between us like an open window we were both too scared to close or walk through. The next morning, the quiet returned, heavier now. I busied myself again, pretending that my world hadn't shifted slightly on its axis. I told myself that it was just kindness, just companionship, but a deeper part of me, the part I'd kept hidden for so long, knew it wasn't that simple anymore. I started noticing the smallest things, how my hands trembled when I thought of him, how I checked the window to see if he was outside before I even realized what I was doing. Then one evening, as I was sitting on the porch sipping tea, I saw him walking up the sidewalk, but something was different. His steps were slower, his head bowed slightly, and beside him was a woman. She was younger, maybe in her 40s, and though she didn't touch him, they walked with a familiarity I couldn't unsee. My stomach twisted. I felt foolish, naive, like I'd allowed my heart to crack open just enough for the cold air to seep in. They reached his door, and I watched as he opened it for her. She smiled at him, and he laughed, an easy, genuine laugh I hadn't heard in weeks. The sound pierced through me like a needle. I don't know how long I sat there after that. The tea grew cold in my hands. My thoughts spiraled. Maybe I'd misunderstood everything. Maybe what I'd felt was a projection, a fragile hope misread in the absence of affection. I told myself to stop romanticizing gestures, to remember that sometimes kindness was just that, nothing more. But just as I stood to go inside, my phone buzzed, a message from Liam. Can we talk tomorrow? There's something I need to explain. My breath caught. A flicker of hope rose before I could stop it, but so did the fear. Because maybe tomorrow would bring answers, or maybe it would unravel everything. I barely slept that night. Liam's message echoed in my mind on an endless loop. There's something I need to explain. What was he going to say? That I'd imagined it all. That the warmth in his gaze, the weight in his silence, the way he'd reach for my hand, all of it had been misinterpreted. I told myself not to spiral, but that's the cruel trick of waiting. It gives your mind the stage and silence the script. By the time morning light crept across the floorboards, I was already dressed, pacing from window to window, like someone waiting for a storm that might never come. At exactly 10 a.m., there was a knock. My heart raced. I opened the door, and there he was, Liam, his face serious, his hands stuffed in the pockets of a well-worn coat. I stepped aside, and he walked in without a word. For a few moments, we just stood there. No small talk, no greetings. The air between us was tense but not hostile, more like the quiet before confession. He turned to me slowly, his voice low. "That woman you saw yesterday, her name's Emily. She's my sister." I blinked. My breath hitched. "Your sister?" He nodded. "You looked hurt. I saw you on your porch, and I didn't know if I should text, call, or come over. I didn't want you thinking I was hiding something, especially not now." Something in my chest unraveled, a knot I hadn't realized I was holding. Relief flooded in, but it was quickly followed by shame. I had doubted him. I had let fear fill in the blanks. I didn't know what to think, I admitted, my voice cracking. I just panicked. Liam took a step closer, his eyes searching mine. "You've been alone for a long time, haven't you?" I nodded slowly, the truth suddenly too heavy to deny. "I don't want to be just someone who brings you soup," he said softly. "I care about you, truly, but I need to know if there's a space in your heart that still wants to let someone in." The question lingered between us like a pulse, steady and terrifying. I didn't answer right away because, yes, I had space. But opening that door, that was the bravest thing I hadn't done yet. I didn't answer right away, not because I didn't want to, but because I wasn't sure how. Liam's words hung in the air like delicate glass. "I need to know if there's a space in your heart that still wants to let someone in. And how do you explain that you've spent so many years convincing yourself that kind of space no longer exists?" I looked at him, really looked at him. There was no pressure in his eyes, no impatience, just the quiet ache of someone who had seen enough silence to recognize it in someone else. I opened my mouth, then closed it again. A wave of vulnerability crashed over me, and for a moment, I almost turned away. But instead, I said, "I don't know if I'm ready, but I'm willing to try." Liam smiled gently, as if that one thread of honesty was all he needed. He didn't try to reach for me, didn't push for more. Instead, he stepped back, nodding with an understanding that made my chest ache. "Trying is enough," he whispered. Over the next few days, something shifted between us. Our conversations grew longer, more open. We shared quiet walks and cups of tea that lingered into dusk. He told me about losing his father, about the silence it left in his mother's kitchen. I told him about my diagnosis, the fear of deterioration, the grief of saying goodbye to a version of myself that once felt strong and invincible. One evening, as we sat on the porch, rain tapping gently against the roof, Liam turned to me. "I used to think strength was about holding everything in, but maybe strength is just saying it out loud." I stared at my hands, nodding slowly. "Then, I've been weak for a very long time." He shook his head. "No, Martha, you've just been surviving. There's a difference." Those words hit deeper than I expected, and that night, when I lay in bed, I realized something. I wasn't afraid of Liam. I was afraid of what he saw in me, the parts I'd hidden, even from myself. But maybe that was the very place healing had to begin. Not with grand gestures, but with truth. And the truth, I didn't want to be alone anymore. The days that followed were soft in their unfolding, yet the tension beneath them simmered with quiet anticipation. Liam didn't press. He never did. He let the space between us be what it was, sometimes filled with words, sometimes only silence, but never empty. There was something in that silence now, though, something fragile, something blooming. I felt it every time his hand brushed mine, when we passed each other in the kitchen, every time our eyes met a beat too long over morning coffee. There was no declaration, no dramatic confession, but there was weight in the way he lingered. Then one evening, everything tipped. It was raining again, spring rain, soft but persistent. We were on the couch, a movie playing in the background that neither of us was really watching. I could feel him beside me, warm, grounded. My body ached a little more than usual, and I shifted with a soft sigh. Liam turned to me, his brow furrowed gently. "Is it bad tonight?" I nodded, trying to smile. "Just a flare-up. It'll pass." And then he reached over, tentatively, as if testing fate, and took my hand. Not out of pity, not to fix it, just to be there, to hold the moment with me. "I've been thinking," he said, quietly, voice nearly lost to the rain, "about what we're doing, what we could be." His grip tightened slightly, just enough to be felt. "I don't want to be a visitor in your life, Martha. I want to stay. I want to build something, even if it's slow, even if it hurts sometimes." My throat tightened. His words, gentle but brave, tore through something inside me. I blinked back tears, not because I was sad, but because for the first time in years, I felt wanted, not out of obligation, not out of duty, but with presence, with heart. "I'm scared," I whispered. "So am I," he replied, "but we can be scared together." And that was it. Not a promise of forever, not a guarantee, but an invitation to begin, to heal, to hope. I leaned my head against his shoulder, and for the first time in a very long time, I let someone hold all the messy, beautiful, broken parts of me, and he didn't flinch. Life rarely gives us what we expect. Sometimes healing doesn't come through doctors or grand revelations. It comes quietly in the form of a neighbor with a kind heart and a warm bowl of soup. What happened between me and Liam wasn't some whirlwind romance. It was slow, honest, and built in the stillness of ordinary days. And maybe that's what real connection is. Not the firework moments, but the hands that reach for yours when the storm rolls in. If there's anything I've learned, it's that vulnerability is not weakness. It's an opening, a doorway to something deeper than survival. It's a path to being seen. So wherever you are in your life, I hope you remember that it's never too late to rediscover yourself, to let someone in, or to start again, gently, one moment at a time. If this story moved you in any way, don't forget to like the video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to Heartfelt Tales Reddit for more stories that speak to the quiet corners of our hearts. There's more to come, more healing, more hope, more of the real, messy beauty of being human. Stay with us. The next chapter is just beginning.